Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series. Can we save the Oakland A's? And after winning our fourth World Series championship in 7 seasons here in 2042, the offseason is finally underway for the Oakland A's. We did our annual roster review in our last episode and basically determined that although we're potentially going to be losing two of our top starters in Doug Weiss and Mike Gallick, plus possibly longtime ace and current closer Jesus Saldana this offseason, along with a very important rental player, Galteria Mancina, and potentially a couple of depth pieces as far as our lineup. Still think that the potential 26-man roster for next season is looking pretty solid. Is it 120 win solid as it was this year? Probably not with that type of attrition that we're expecting. But if we move on from most of the players that we mentioned, still feel pretty comfortable that we should be fielding a pretty competitive roster next year, and we'll start really moving forward with some of the decisions that we're going to need to make this offseason in our next episode. To get things started, we have made arbitration offers to 4 of our 5 arbitration-eligible players. Number 5 starter Dave Baumler, excellent reliever Jonathan Shearer, second baseman / first baseman Luis Godina, and left fielder Darnell Selvey. Want to bring all of them back. We're still uncertain what to do with backup catcher Ron Markley for around $2.5 million. I think he's a good enough player that we can afford to pay him that amount as a backup catcher if we want to. But if we decide to perhaps get a little creative and bring one of the pitchers that I mentioned earlier back, moving on from Markley and replacing him with someone who's making the major league minimum might be the right way to save a little bit of money. We have submitted initial qualifying offers to both Gallick and Weiss, but again, it's not inconceivable that we try to perhaps bring one of them back as a 5th starter for us. And before we get into our review of some of the top prospects in baseball, some of our former players, and most importantly, our farm system, did get some interesting initial thoughts and feedback to the last episode I wanted to talk through briefly. Sage Dierks mentioned the potential, given that we're possibly moving on from both Weiss and Gallick, and although even if we put Villarreal back into the rotation and move Baumler up to the number 4 starter, we don't necessarily love our number 5 starter situation. And Sage recommended potentially going with a follower or opener in that 5 role to leverage the outstanding bullpen we have, which is definitely a good idea and something I should probably play around a bit more with in OOTP, given that I am old school sports and I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I don't love the whole opener follower milieu that has evolved over the past 20 years or so in baseball. I guess longer than that if you start thinking back to Tony La Russa in the, I believe, early 90s even. But right now, with the fact that we do also have Jesus Ramos and Mike Homer among prospects who could certainly be a 5th starter, along with Ernesto Comunez, who we really envisioned ultimately being a starter for us when he gave him a 10-year, $60 million deal. The 24-year-old hasn't necessarily improved as much as we would have hoped, but still with a little luck in the development lab could become a better than 5th type starter. But I think I'm inclined, even if Weiss and Gallick are both gone, to go with the rotation of Arriola, Villarreal, Blumenshine, Baumler, and then Comunez. But it's an interesting proposal, an idea from Sage Dierks. Appreciate that. And as I said, probably something I should give more real credence to and learn more about, but I'm cranky and I'm old and I do things the traditional way. Another interesting point, and we'll be talking about this shortly, was from Bladestaff, who suggested if we lose Weiss and Gallic, maybe bringing in a fifth starter who could potentially be a depth starter for us, even if we do go with Comunez, just to give us some options down the line and some insurance for when the inevitable injuries happen. And I guess I'll talk about this guy now rather than in a few minutes. But when we look at the potential free agent class among pitchers, Gallic and Weiss, along with Mendick, a guy we traded away last offseason, some of the preeminent names out there. Also Mike Orozco, our former stopper. But the guy that I'm focused on is Joe Lewin, a farmhand we traded away several years ago. You can see he's looking to be a free agent and supposedly is only going to be looking for around $5.5 million. Was 12-7 with a 5.32 ERA this year for the Phillies. He got off to a really fast start in his career, not long after we traded him away, going 15-8 in his first season as a his first full season as a starter. But he's now won double-digit games for the Phillies for 7 consecutive years. Pretty much consistently gone out, pitched 32, 33, 34 games a season. 112 ERA plus and 86 FIP minus, only a bit above average for his career. And as he's gotten into his late 20s, he hasn't been as effective as he was in his early to mid 20s, so that's not necessarily positive. But after making $30.5 million this past year, it looks like Lewin is a lot more reasonable about who he is at this point in his career. Don't necessarily think he's a perfect option, but compared to close to $20 million for the likes of Gallic and Weiss, over $20 million for an Ishmael Carrera, able to bring in a lefty like Lewin, who could certainly fill a fifth starter role for us in a pinch, and probably contribute coming out of the bullpen, even if we didn't need him in the rotation immediately, is something that I'm thinking about a little bit. So definitely lots of decisions and permutations of what every decision we make, whether it be in the trade market, pursuing a free agent, letting a free agent go, could mean on the roster going forward, are the things that we'll be thinking about seriously over the next few days in real life time, in the next few episodes in OOTP 25 YouTube time. It's time now to turn to our annual review of some of the more interesting prospects in baseball. Not a ton of pitchers out there that we've been following that closely. Kurt Hall, the number 23 prospect in baseball, a guy who was picked in the second round back in 2038, just missed out on being able to bring Warrior into our organization. Still seems like the Texas Rangers organization is being very conservative in his development. He's spent most of the last 3 years in A-ball for them, and he's been very effective in both 2041 and 2042 at that level. They only promoted him to high A at the end of this year, where he did have a 6 ERA, but only allowed 4 hits with no walks and 7 strikeouts in 6 innings pitched in his 1 appearance, so was still fairly effective there. Probably just got a little bit unlucky with a few hits being strung together. Still looks like he could be a very solid major league pitcher. You know, we talk about the people who could be our 5th starter next year, and whether it's Lewin, Comunez, Ramos, even Homer, somebody else. Kurt Hall certainly looks like he's going to be a better pitcher than either of them. And he honestly kind of looks ready for the majors right now. So hopefully the Rangers AI manager won't derail his career by unnecessarily keeping him in the minors for far too long. Edison Faulo, 7-12 with a 4.38 ERA for the Pirates this year. Kind of is what he is at this point. A respectable left-hand major league pitcher. Led the National League in BABIP this year, so probably got a little lucky compared to previous seasons. Nice, solid pitcher. One-time All-Star, but definitely not a superstar. Kazuki Asari is a guy who we thought could be a very interesting pitcher. International free agent signing from several years ago. Finally made it up to AAA this year with the Tigers organization, but continues to have some significant issues. Ruptured his UCL in mid-May and missed the rest of the season, so he only pitched 8 games total between A-ball and AAA. The 22-year-old probably going to miss spring training next year. Maybe he gets an opportunity to begin his season by sometime in May if things go well. Doesn't look like he's going to be a dominant ace at this point, but certainly in a best-case scenario, still could be a very good major league pitcher, a good solid 2 or 3 if he reaches his full potential. But at 22, with the injury issues he's had and his lack of a real strong work ethic, I do continue to question whether he'll ultimately reach his full potential and truly be worthy of being viewed as the number 16 prospect in baseball. A few more position players to follow, including some that we've added to the list this past year. Alvaro Cepeda, 26-year-old, out with a herniated disc. He has become a major leaguer for the Guardians, but had a brutal year offensively this past season with just a 61 WRC+. You can see his WRC+ has moved from all-star caliber to an above-average major leaguer to a disastrous offensive season over the past 3 years. He's also fragile physically and still has a very poor personality, which is one of the reasons why we were not as interested in him as a few members of the worldwide scouting department 8.5 years ago when we first looked at him. We already talked a little bit about Kurt Hall as far as his pitching side of things, but Warrior is a potential two-way guy as well. And he had a really nice season in A-ball and was productive in an admittedly small sample size when he got called up to high A at the end. Still think he could be a very interesting player overall. Looks like a solid major league arm. And ultimately still think he could have a really interesting bat. In retrospect, probably wish we had grabbed him when we could have in 2038. But it is what it is. Cameron Rhodes, another guy that we passed on, 24-year-old, had an off year in Colorado after a really nice rookie season, during which he actually won a Gold Glove last year. Still led the National League in triples this year and increased his doubles and home runs from his rookie season, but ultimately went from being a well above average offensive player to a below average offensive player, as his batting average, OPS, slugging percentage all dipped materially. He ran less than a year ago. Still an above average major league player, but looking at his profile, I wouldn't say that he's exciting as a left fielder. He's a good, solid major league left fielder with a profile like that, decent speed, good glove, good personality, switch hitter. He's probably a guy who among the 30 left fielders in baseball is going to, be the 10th best left fielder in a really good year for him and the 18th best left fielder in baseball in an off year for him. So certainly some value with Rhodes. Alexis Campos, another IAFA signing from 2038. Spent the entire year in high A ball, but put up only a 72 WRC plus for the Tampa Bay organization. Still has blistering speed and a good glove. The question is whether he will make good enough contact and drive the ball in the gaps frequently enough to make up for lack of power and very undisciplined batting eye. Juan Mancebes, may remember him from the draft a year ago. We're very intrigued by his potential glove. We're obviously concerned greatly about his bat. And so far, those fears seem well-founded. Spent the full year in A-ball this year as a 23-year-old and hit just 209. So do question whether he's ever really going to be useful as a major leaguer. Jesus Sauceda, another guy who we were not all that interested in because of his personality. You may remember we picked him up in a trade a few years ago and subsequently moved him on to the Yankees in the trade last year when we brought on Jim West. That was the Chuck Huntley deal. And Sauceda still hasn't made it out of rookie ball at the age of 20. Did hit 314 in rookie ball for the Yankees this year with a 121 WRC plus. If he reaches his full potential, could still be an interesting player. I will go back and talk about Jim West right now. You remember he's the shortstop who we thought could develop into a pretty interesting bat for us. And unfortunately, he had a pretty mediocre season in high A ball for a guy who's almost 24 years old. Hit just 221. Did have 27 doubles and 12 homers, so there was a little bit of pop in his bat. Still very intrigued by his glove and a left-handed hitting middle infielder who might have a little bit of pop. But certainly we're hoping for a bigger year for a guy who's been out of college for a couple of years now. Isn't I said, going to be 24 years old soon. We're hoping that a guy like West might be able to help us at the major league level more quickly than it seems like he is likely to at this point. And then a few real high-end prospects from more recent discussions. Adalberto Bacias, IAFA signing from 2041, still at the international complex for the Pirates, and still looks like he could be an interesting bat if everything works out. Juan Bonilla, IAFA signing from the same class in 2041. Also still just hanging out at the international complex. Would imagine we'll get a chance to see if he can develop into the contact hitter that when we were scouting him in Miami, certainly when they were signing him, dreamed that he might become. And Juan Villa, who was drafted a year ago in the 5th round. 245 average and 249 at-bats in his introduction to rookie ball this past season. He was a guy who dropped a few rounds, was looking for some big money, and we had several opportunities to pick him and never did. Still looks like he could be a pretty interesting hitter if he develops to his full potential. So a quick check-in on some of the more interesting prospects we've been following over the years. And now we'll turn our attention to some more experienced players, many of whom who have had time with our Oakland A's over the years. And we've expanded the lists a little bit this year just to include some of the true superstars of the game that we end up talking about around awards season frequently each year. Tim Killeen is a guy that we traded away out of our organization several years ago at this point. Spent this past year in AAA where he was not particularly good. At 29 years old, Killeen looks like a marginal major leaguer at best. Probably will stop checking in on him going forward. Certainly not feeling any regrets after we picked him in the 20th round and then flipped him with some other guys a few years ago in exchange for a backup catcher at the time. Doesn't seem to have been all that eventful of a trade for either squad. We already talked about Joe Lewin. If his salary demands are as reasonable as we suspect they might be, and we decide to move on from both Weiss and Gallick, Lewin could definitely be in the mix to bring on as rotational depth. Our former closer, Chuck Huntley, who had really started to regress in his late 20s, guy we traded away to the Yankees organization, and he had a mid-3 ERA in 63 innings pitched out of the bullpen. 6-0 record, but no saves, was apparently not used in the most high-leverage situations, and was slightly below replacement level when you put all of his numbers together. Doesn't look like he's regressed further in terms of his velocity from back when he was in our organization. But you do have to recall this is a guy who was throwing not that long ago in the triple digits and looked like he was going to be an absolute monster. And now his stuff is a little bit above average, throws in the low 90s, and he's making pretty decent money at $7.2 million, set to get a raise of about $1 million next season. So still glad that we moved on from Mr. Huntley. Chase Dora, important member of our rotation for 3 World Championship teams, 9-9 with a 3.57 ERA for the Dodgers, a 3 WAR, although he missed some games. Looks like he was shut down with shoulder inflammation in early September. In terms of his WAR, it was kind of a good, solid Chase Dora season, but the Dodgers are paying full price for that. We had him when he was more cost-effective. Andres Rojas, the 35-year-old knuckleballer, 15-9 with a 4.29 ERA for the Yankees. He continues to put together a very interesting career. 191 and 123 at this point, with an ERA in the mid-threes and a career WAR approaching 70 as he tries to burnish his Hall of Fame credentials. Speaking of Hall of Fame credentials, the last 3 guys we'll talk about are certainly all well on their way there. Steve Jenas, whose streak of 7 consecutive Cy Young Awards was ended last season by our ace, Federico Arriola. 10-7 with a 3.05 ERA this year for Texas. Looks like he may have finally started having some minor injury issues this year that cost him several starts. Still was a pretty productive pitcher when he was on the mound, and his ratings suggest that he could be for some time to come. Andy Grimes, the brilliant youngster for the Nationals. A off year for him, at least in terms of the win, only 9-8 after winning 20+ and leading the league 2 years in a row, but still led the league in innings pitched, strikeouts, whip, strikeouts per 9, FIP minus, and WAR. Going to be interesting to say if OOTP will consider a starting pitcher without 10 wins for a 3rd consecutive Cy Young Award this year. And last but certainly not least is Mike Ramsey, one of the great two-way players in baseball history. Led the National League this year with 20 wins, 20-4 record with a league best 2.76 ERA and a 6.5 WAR as a pitcher. And Ramsey, pretty solid offensive season as well. Hit 260 with 27 homers, 89 ribbies, and put up another 4.4 WAR as a position player. So the 31-year-old remains a truly special pitcher and a unicorn-type player when you look at his incredible pitching ability combined with a very good major league bat. And we'll turn our attention now to some position players. Byron Brain, who we traded away years ago, looks like he is kind of moving into the part-time player portion of his career. The batting average was a sickly 131 this year. The strikeouts still ridiculous with 128 of them in 222 at-bats. 31 WRC plus and below replacement level despite his defense behind the plate remaining absolutely outstanding. Sergio Figueroa, 134 WRC plus for Milwaukee this year. The only issue is that he only got 277 at-bats. Don't know if he had injury issues or no, only a bruised shin this year. Hamstring strain did keep him about 3 to 4 weeks. But even with that, starting just 75 games, looks like may have been a platoon guy with the Brewers playing against right-handed pitching, getting less action against left-handed pitching if I had to guess how they probably used him. But still a good, solid player. Alejandro Landin, our longtime infielder, 4-time All-Star, 3-time World Series champion who we traded away last offseason. Seems like moving on from Landin perhaps a year early was the right decision, and maybe it really wasn't a year early, as he hit just 220 with only 5 homers and a 74 WRC plus for the Twins this year. Still remains popular and good defensively, but he's fragile physically. He's in his 30s now, and the bat is certainly nothing special at this point. Jorge Mendoza, another one of our former players who left as a free agent this past offseason, signed with the Red Sox. Very good defensive catcher with a very good bat for a catcher, but he had a rough year, hit just 248, did have 17 homers and 74 ribbies, stole 14 bases, but only a 91 WRC plus and a 1.3 WAR. So a pretty big drop-off from what he had been doing with us in the 3.5 seasons he was with us in Oakland. Put up 3.84 and 6.1 WARs for those 3 full seasons we had with him in Oakland, and just a 1.3 this year in his 30-year-old season for the Red Sox. So another guy who we probably moved on from at the right time. And, of course, speaking about guys who we may or may not have moved on from the right time, Jake Ortega, you can see he's injured. And, unfortunately, Mr. Ortega broke his kneecap in May, so he missed most of his second season with the Yankees. He's been wrecked physically for a long time at this point. The scouting report says he's still a very effective offensive player when he's healthy. The issue is just he's never healthy at this point. Just 124 at-bats for the Yankees this year. Had 6 doubles, 5 homers, 21 ribbies, a 118 WRC plus when he was healthy. Just didn't play enough. The Yankees have got him for at least next year, and then a vesting option potentially for 2044. It stinks to move on from a guy that we drafted right near the top of the draft in the first round the last time we had the opportunity to pick really early in a draft, and who won 2 MVP awards, a Rookie of the Year, and 3 championships while he was with us in Oakland. But certainly with the money that he's making and the fact that in 2 years with the Yankees he's played in only 140 games, given the financial constraints we're dealing with in Oakland, it's hard for me to regret it all moving on from Mr. Ortega for anything besides sentimental reasons. But as interesting as it is to check in on prospects around baseball and some of our former players and see how they're doing, the part of this annual episode that I enjoy the most and find the most interesting is taking a look at our prospects and our farm system. And we still have a highly regarded farm system that ranks 8th out of 30 overall, but only one top 50 prospect. As you'll see, we have incredible depth in terms of the number of top 200 prospects that we have in the organization, but only one guy who's truly a blue chip prospect at this point, and that's Luis Villarreal, who made his debut at the end of this year. And we've signed to a long-term deal, and we envision hopefully taking over for Doug Weiss as our number 2 starter next year. We do have 7 other players ranked in the top 100. Again, depth rather than top-end quality in the farm system. Jacoby Manelli, the IAFA signing from 2038, is the highest rated everyday prospect in our organization. Still think if he reaches his full potential, that bat could be very interesting for us. Spent the entire year in A-ball where he was a slightly above average offensive player. Like the 15 home runs, don't like the 115 strikeouts and the 227 batting average. Question I get relatively frequently in the comments to various episodes and discussions is, how do you decide when to promote somebody? And certainly in a perfect world, if Manelli had performed better than just kind of being an average guy in A-ball this year, I wouldn't have minded getting him some seasoning in high A. But throughout the season, when I've looked at his ratings relative to the level that he's at, he looked like he was ready to be a competent offensive player in A-ball at the age of 21, which he was. But if you think about promoting him up to the Midwest League, it's looked like he's going to struggle there a bit. If he was hitting 327 in A-ball with nothing more to prove at that level, I might be inclined to promote a guy like that with 45s across the board to the next level. But typically, I want to see some 50s and hopefully even some numbers higher than a 50 there before I promote a guy, because I don't want them to be overwhelmed at the new level. In the case of Manelli, it's been a slow but steady progress up through the organization for him. When we look at where his ceiling is, 65 contact, 70 home run power, still think he could be a very impactful offensive player for us. But he's going to have to start making up the gap between where he is and where we think his ceiling is, and also producing a bit more effectively against the lower levels of competition he's still currently facing if he's going to really become an impact major leaguer for us. Jerry Stevenson, a 7th-round pick, high school pitcher who's developed into a pretty interesting prospect, was a combined 14-8 between A and high A this year, dominant at high A with a 1.56 ERA over 57 2/3 innings. Looks like he's on his way to a nice 4 to 5 pitch arsenal, good stamina, good at holding on runners. Think he looks like a solid back of the rotation type of starter. And with a little bit of luck, he could definitely be more than that with his ground ball tendencies, a fastball in the mid to high 90s. We'll see how he develops, but definitely some positive vibes around him. Another guy with very positive momentum is Roque de la Paz. He moved from our Arizona League team up through A-ball to high A-ball this year, and was pretty dominant at all 3 levels, 1.29 ERA in 21 innings in high A-ball. Still envision Roque de la Paz as a potentially devastating left-handed arm out of the bullpen. And if we're ever able to get lucky with him in the development lab and perhaps add another pitch and or improve his stamina, could become a very interesting starting pitching prospect. But the 20-year-old still throws close to the triple digits, and we think he's going to be a big-time lefty arm for us in the future. Nelson Ramiro is a guy who could be helping us in the majors in not too long. He's listed as a first baseman, but you can see with those infield ratings that he's likely to be able to play at a pretty high level anywhere in the infield. We've just been trying to make him as versatile as possible. Number 80 prospect in baseball, no question about his glove. And his bat right now looks like it's not too far off major league quality. Had a monster year for us in Double-A. Probably could have promoted him to AAA late in the year, but we had a pretty stacked roster there. But would certainly suspect that Ramiro will be beginning next year at AAA. It's not inconceivable. We could jump him all the way from Double-A to the majors. Type of guy that you might want to think about a contract extension with early. Looking for around $50 million over 10 years. Given that I don't think the bat is ultimately anything all that special, probably inclined to be conservative as far as extending him. David Ibarra, guy who has made his major league debut this past year, number 87 prospect in baseball. Looks like he can be a very important part of our bullpen for the next several seasons. Juan Moreno, guy we picked up in that trade with St. Louis last offseason when we tried to leverage several guys who did not have long-term futures with us to bring a guy who maybe could turn into something on board. Split the year between our DSL team and our ACL team, and was very productive at both levels. The 20-year-old presumably will start next year in A-ball. And our final top 100 prospect is Mike Homer, the two-way player who made his debut this past season and will be fighting for a roster spot in spring training with the big club. And we've still got a lot of guys to talk about in our farm system. We've talked about our 8 top 100 prospects right now, but we've got 10 guys ranked between 101 and 200, so we'll touch on each of them as well. Some familiar names here. Devin Carrick, a 6th rounder, who has just slowly and steadily developed into a potentially interesting player for us. Was above average in both high A ball and double A ball offensively this year. Still waiting for that potential home run power to develop. If it does, he's a pretty interesting offensive player. If it doesn't, a little less interesting, but certainly a left-handed hitter who could be useful a few years down the line. It's just a matter of really reaching his potential as far as hitting the ball out of the park. Luis Rangel, another infielder who is not far away, split the year between high A ball and double A ball and combined for 28 home runs and 74 ribbies at those two levels, with WRC pluses well above league average at both levels. Think he could be a guy who can play just about any position in the infield. Wouldn't love him at shortstop with that 55 range and 50 error, but he can certainly play there in a pinch. Question with him is the bat going to be a major league bat, or will it be a bit above average? And if the bat ultimately gets to a bit above average with solid glove and solid speed, he could be a contributor in our infield in the not too distant future. We've talked about Jesus Ramos in the past few episodes, guy who could be competing for the number 5 starter spot next year. Juan Misquez is the 127th ranked prospect in baseball, an 8th round pick from just 2 years ago. Has not put up good numbers with our ACL team, but still is a guy that we think could have absolutely devastating stuff. Just needs to figure out how to get the ball over the plate and keep the ball in the ballpark. And if he can do both of those things, he could still be a pretty interesting left-handed pitcher. Odds are a guy like him isn't going to make it, but you can tell that he's got potential with where he is on this list. Clorindo Moreno, IAFA signing from 2041. You may remember him. He was a focus of ours, ended up giving him $2.8 million, and he made his debut in the DSL this year. The 11-2 record, very impressive. The 72 walks in 92 innings with a 6.16 ERA, much less so. So still a lot of work for Moreno to do. Looks like more of a back end of the rotation type of starter, unless we get really lucky with his development. But still think he could turn into a useful major leaguer if all goes well. Gabe Kimball, our first round draft pick from a year ago in 2041, was a little better in his first full year in rookie ball this year. Positively, 13 doubles, 11 homers, stole 7 bases, drew 40 walks. Negatively, hit just .223 and struck out 112 times. But still think he could have a potentially interesting glove and bat combination. And he was still an above average offensive player with a 2.6 WAR in rookie ball this year, his first full year in the minors. So could certainly see him in A-ball next year. Moving on to our final 4 prospects in the top 200. Kadir Noyle, second round pick from 2038, spent the whole year in high A-ball, put up a 142 WRC plus. No question about his glove, no question about his speed. The big question is his bat. And with that 142 WRC plus this year, 34 homers in 517 at-bat, he answered that question at the high A level. The question will be what he can do next year in double A. DeAnthony Bramblett, second round pick from 2039, split the year between A and high A, combined for 19 home runs at both levels. He's kind of one of the guys who hadn't necessarily impressed in a season plus in A-ball. Given that he's closing in on 22 years old, though, we just decided, hey, we got to see this guy sink or swim. Promoted him to high A-ball, and he was much more productive at that level than he actually was at A-ball. Would expect that he could be starting next year in double A as well, similar to his current teammate Noyle. Jesus Berlanga, IAFA signing from 2037, looks like a potentially outstanding right-handed reliever. Split the year between AA and AAA. Wasn't particularly effective at each level, but he strikes out a lot of batters, which you would expect with that outstanding fastball and slider combination. With average movement and average-ish control at this point, unless that control does get materially better. He's probably just a middle reliever, but could be a pretty effective middle reliever for us with his arsenal. And last but not least, the 19-year-old Mike Mercer, one of our first rounders in 2041, was 2-4 with a 3.74 ERA in his first full season in rookie ball this year. Question for him is whether he's going to be ready for A-ball next year. Certainly looks like he's more than capable of competing in the ACL, which is what he also proved on the mound this year. He's ready-ish for the California League. His stuff and his control are right there. Movement a little below average, but given that he is a guy we have first-round resources in, and he's going to be turning 20 early next season, probably will be inclined to challenge him a bit and push him up to A-ball next year. And there's obviously plenty other prospects we could talk about. I mean, we've basically gone through the whole list. Might as well just touch on these last 2 guys. Tawase Zuabri, IAFA signing from 2040, had a monster year for us in the DSL this year, hit 357 with a 151 WRC plus. Like his glove, and still think the bat could be a interesting major league bat if he reaches his full potential. Clearly a very impressive profile for the DSL, which we saw in his performance. Looks like he would be fine if we moved him to the ACL team. Big question is whether he's ready to make that bigger jump up to the California League or not. Or we should have him play with some of the high school and college players to start off next year, get a little more seasoning before potentially moving him up to A-ball. And then Kevin Stanaway, former fourth-round pick in 2039, spent the whole year in A-ball where he was a below-average offensive player. Question for him is whether he's going to ever realize the home run potential that we thought he had. Doesn't seem like the eye is ever going to be anything special. And he's almost 22 years old, and he still hasn't even made it to high A ball. So the development's certainly not going incredibly well for Mr. Stanaway, but might be one of those guys that we just have to move up to high A ball and see if perhaps he's more productive at that level than he was at single A. He's not happy with his role on his team. Fortunately, he's also very unhappy with his performance, which given that he hit a $186, he should be. He doesn't quite look like he was even ready for the California League this year in Class A. So when we bump him up to the Midwest League, it could be even more of a struggle. But again, he's going to be 22 years old. With some of these guys, they've just got to eventually sink or swim at a higher level because they can't handle high A ball at 22. Probably not going to be able to handle the major leagues at 24. And with Stanaway, you can see we're always just trying to make players as versatile as possible. He's listed as a left fielder now because that's where we've been forced starting him, but he's actually a pretty brutal potential left fielder. The issue with Stanaway is that he's not necessarily all that great anywhere in the infield either. His ratings suggest first base is the only place to play him. But he's also only 6 feet tall, so he's certainly not anything special in terms of his reach there. Big question is whether he's ever going to have a bat that will justify dealing with his likely mediocre to poor defense. Not necessarily optimistic he's ever going to get there offensively, but still not willing to throw in the towel quite yet. And there is one other prospect I wanted to talk about who's not listed as one of the top prospects in baseball anymore, but still has been making slow but steady progress through our organization. And that's David Palomares, a big IAFA signing from 2037. Gorian del Quimbo, left-handed hitting, durable middle infielder. No question at all about his glove. The question has always been, is his bat going to develop to where we need it to? And he made some pretty significant strides this year. Put up a 129 WRC plus in 89 games in AA, and then we promoted him to AAA where he really blossomed. Hitting over 300 with 15 homers and 41 ribbies in just 202 at-bats. OPS of over 1,000 and a 143 WRC plus. He combined for a 5.8 WAR at both levels. We've talked in the previous episode about potentially moving on from some of our infielders, Amari Alcindor, Chris Lance, among the guys who could find their roster spots in jeopardy next year. And a reason why is Palomares. I think he gives us the same kind of defense as a middle infielder that Alcindor does. And he gives us a left-handed bat that might be borderline useful, similar to what Chris Lance we had hoped would give us. So with that combination, there's part of me that thinks that Palomares should be a very strong contender for a roster spot this upcoming season. I don't think he's ever going to be a superstar. I just don't think the bat is that special. Hope I'm wrong. But that being said, he's a durable left-handed hitting middle infielder whose contact, gap power, and home run power could all be a little bit above average. And when you combine that with decent speed and a pretty good glove, that's a potentially valuable player, even though, as I noted, he's not listed as a blue chip prospect anymore. And he's a guy who's also not looking for a ton of money, less than $30 million over 10 years. And I think the worst case for Palomares is that he's a excellent utility infielder. The best case is that he ends up being a good starting second baseman, shortstop, or third baseman. Given the limitations on his bat, I don't think there's a scenario where he becomes a great player. But if the floor is an outstanding utility infielder who can give us great defense with a representative bat that happens to be left-handed anywhere, and he's durable, and that's kind of the worst case situation, and the best case is that he could be a starter for us, an average of less than $3 million over 10 years is a gamble that I'm willing to take as the general manager of the Oakland A's. So we're going to put a package together for Gorian Del Kimbo right now and see if we can lock him in for what will likely be the rest of this playthrough, given that it's Super Bowl weekend 2025 as I am recording this episode, and we've probably only got a couple of months till the new version of OOTP is available. And Palomares, as we talked about, says he was looking for $29.65 million over 10 years. We're going to offer him the potential to earn $25 million over 10 years, but protect ourselves a bit with team options for those final 2 seasons. Salary peaks at $3 million a year over the last potential 6 years of this contract. Again, I think for a guy who we think is a very good utility infielder in a worst case scenario, that's money we can probably afford to spend. And there is some chance with his bat, the way that it looks, that he develops into a guy that's, maybe not quite what Alejandro Landin was for us over the years. Maybe closer to Andy Toribio, a guy who can be a starting middle infielder for us at a really good value for several seasons. With the kind of money we have to pay him, I think it's a risk I'm more than willing to take. So we're going to ask him for a response. Oof. Unfortunately, we were a little too low in our offer to him. We'll see if maybe we can up it a bit and still try to lock him up for 10 years. If not, we'll regroup. And we're going to try to make things a little more palatable for Palomares. We're going to take out those option years at the end. Increase the total value of the contract to $26 million guaranteed, and also offer him some bonuses for an MVP or an all-star selection. Clearly, if he reaches either of those plateaus with the amount of money that we're going to be paying him, he's going to be a very useful and cost-effective player for us. I would hope that this would be palatable enough that he'll take it to his family, given what he's looking for. And he is willing to think about this offer. So we'll get that out to Palomares. As I mentioned, we've also got the 4 offers out to 4 of our arbitration-eligible players. Before we finish up the episode, one last thing I want to find out for myself and also share with the worldwide scouting department is what some of the players that we could be looking to move on from this offseason might be worth in the trade market. Talked about backup catcher Ron Markley, set to be making about $2.5 million in arbitration next year. I feel like we can afford to have him back, like his glove, certainly like his bat for a backup catcher. He was very productive for us this year and limited playing time behind Jonah Richards. So I think there might be some interesting trade value for Markley. Probably not going to be overwhelming, but I think we can get some interesting guys in return. There's some interesting current players and some interesting prospects. Gilberto Aguilar looks like an interesting bat for a left-handed hitting first baseman, although he wasn't that great last year he was great in Double-A, but wasn't all that impressive in Triple-A, and he's 24 years old. Another first baseman, Ernesto Sauceda, durable 24-year-old. He's been an above-average offensive player in the majors over the past 2.5 seasons for the Nationals. Wouldn't say that either of them is all that exciting, but if we decide to move on from Mr. Markley because we feel like one of our younger catchers is a better and cheaper move for the organization, at least we can potentially get something interesting in return for him. Can also check in on two other guys. One is Amari Alcindor. He is signed for several more seasons, and the dollar value is getting higher and higher. If we do end up getting Mr. Palomares signed, and I mentioned that there's a couple other middle infielder types who are not that far away, it might finally be time to move on from Alcindor, who we've tried giving an option to show he can be a full-time player for us at many occasions over these past 5 seasons that he's been in the majors. And although he's been close to a league average offensive player in balance, he's just never really put a stranglehold on any position that we've been playing him at. Shopping around Mr. Alcindor, and there's still a lot of interest in him. He seems to be one of these guys whose profile in terms of his ratings may look a little better than what he actually has produced on the field. I don't want to say there's a huge disparate difference, but above average gap power, slightly above average home run power, average eye, average contact, really good base running instincts. I think in a perfect world, that's maybe a guy who's a 105 kind of WRC plus guy instead of a 95 WRC plus guy. But there's still a lot of interest in him, as you can see. I know some of you have wanted us to trade him away for the past couple seasons at this point, fearing that this contract would become an untradeable one. But that certainly doesn't seem to have materialized right now. Again, I'm just simply looking at the star ratings here quickly. Amari Mins, a 24-year-old left fielder. We don't have a great take on him scouting-wise for some reason. But the 24-year-old is a durable former first-round pick. Combined last year for 24 home runs at AAA. Oh, it's actually 24 home runs between AAA and the majors for the Angels organization. Was an above-average offensive player there. I mean, it seems like we could also use Alcindor and potentially, to a lesser extent, Markley in a package if we really wanted to try to bring on a big-time prospect or maybe someone who could really solidify our rotation with someone who's more of a proven number 3 kind of guy, or we think can be a good solid number 3 kind of guy, rather than just trying to fill out that 5th spot in the rotation with someone who's a little more marginal. So good to see that there's still a fair amount of value in Alcindor, some potential trade value in Markley. And last but not least, don't necessarily want to have to do this. Trey Saldana was a huge part of our rotation and was going to be a guy that we were really building around because he was one of our young pitchers who we were able to sign to a long-term deal. But with the big decline in stamina that he experienced after that torn UCL cost him over a year. Question is whether we want to keep him in the organization when he's going to be making about $10 million a year for the next few seasons, or try to monetize him as well. We had moved him into that closer role to see if maybe someone looks at him as a very cost-effective closer now, making about $10 million a year. I think there's going to be some demand for Trey Saldana. I don't think I'm going to be blown away by it. Yeah, you can see it's actually a bit less than even the demand for the backup catcher Markley. So the contract is not being viewed all that positively, even though we've tried to trick people into thinking he might be a closer. But, you know, we can get a young catcher in Doug Huckabee who looks like a potentially competent backup catcher if we needed him to be, if we just decide that we want to get Trey Saldana's contract off the books, which I think is probably what I'm leaning towards. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem, based on this level of demand, that Saldana is really going to help supplement the likes of Alcindor and Richards if we want to try to put together a very impressive package for a big-time prospect or a big-time major leaguer, but can't find value in everybody. And at this point, it looks like with Saldana, it may be just a situation where we look to do addition by subtraction, take whatever we can get in return for him just to get that guaranteed money off the books. And again, if we get Saldana's contract off the books with some of the other moves that we're contemplating, we can potentially put ourselves in a situation if we were to, say, trade away Saldana's money, trade away Markley, and move on from that $2.5 million-ish salary, save ourselves about $1.8 million by having a rookie on the minimum as our backup catcher, and then also free up several million more dollars by trading away Alcindor. Then all of a sudden, there is a scenario where if we want to handle the replenishment of our rotation organically, we can just make an offer to a Doug Weiss or a Mike Gallick and try to bring one of those two guys back. I think based on what I've just seen, it's hard for me to justify bringing Saldana back at that kind of money when everyone else in the league is telling us it's not that great a contract at this point. So I think I'm inclined to try to trade Saldana away. I'm going to work on whether there's any interesting packages that we can get for the likes of Alcindor and Markley and maybe some of our other players who are Rule 5 eligible that aren't going to be making our 40-man roster. And then we'll be giving some thought to, is Gallick, is Weiss, is Joe Lewin, or is somebody else the best option to fill out our starting pitching staff in 2043. So we've got a lot of interesting decisions to make going forward. If you have thoughts on how we should proceed, always helpful to hear those in the comment section. And until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.